Okay. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Sabancı Center. My name is Esme Stout, and on behalf of the OECD Network for Foundations Working for Development, I'm delighted to welcome you to this joint OECD Sabancı Foundation event, Strengthening Philanthropy's Strategic Role in Gender Financing. So at netFWD, a key part of our work is generating evidence and creating dialogue that makes philanthropy a more visible and strategic partner for development. So today's discussion is going to be grounded in the OECD's flagship Private Philanthropy for Development 3rd edition report, which we released earlier this year in March 2026. So this draws on the world's largest comparable and transparent data set on how philanthropy supports development. And the findings show how both cross-border and domestic philanthropy, like the Sabancı Foundation, support gender equality and development goals more generally. So we're especially pleased to be here today to be discussing these findings in Turkey with the Sabancı Foundation. As the only foundation from Turkey consistently contributing data to the OECD Center on Philanthropy, it plays a key role in strengthening the global evidence base for how philanthropy supports development and shines a light on the importance of domestic philanthropy for development, and in this case, gender. Its long-standing commitment to gender equality and active engagement in international initiatives, most recently the Foundation 7 and the upcoming COP31 event that will take place here in Turkey later this year, make it an ideal partner for today's discussion when we aim to bridge that gap between domestic funding and international policy dialogues for development. We're also delighted to be joined by colleagues from the OECD Istanbul Center, as well as international philanthropy and development representatives. So together, we're going to highlight local, regional, and international perspectives on philanthropy's role in supporting development, and specifically gender in this case. So over the next hour and a half, we have 3 key objectives. We're going to share evidence from the OECD's Private Philanthropy for Development report, specifically looking at the gender dimension. We're going to explore philanthropy's role as a strategic and catalytic partner in financing for gender, especially in light of recent ODA cuts. And we're going to highlight the value of data and increase the visibility of domestic philanthropy like Sabancı in Turkey and beyond. So in terms of the agenda, we'll begin with opening remarks from our distinguished keynotes. We'll have a presentation of the report's key findings to situate our discussion, and then we'll hear from our outstanding panel of both local and international experts looking at philanthropy's catalytic role for gender. So we hope you're going to enjoy the conversation. For those of you who would like, I understand that there are translation headsets available, so do feel free to use them. And without further ado, it is my pleasure to invite Ashraf Buali, head of OECD Istanbul Center, to deliver our opening remarks for the day. So the OECD Istanbul Center is the regional hub for global relations. Previously, Ashraf served as a member of parliament in the Netherlands and held a range of senior diplomatic positions in the Dutch Foreign Service, including as deputy ambassador to Cuba. Ashraf, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and good morning to everybody. Dear Madam Sabancı, Güler, distinguished speakers and participants. It's a bit of a special moment actually for me to be here. That's because today is our 4th birthday. In June 2022, me and my team, we started here in Istanbul. We have a mixed team of international officers and Turkish officers, and we've opened the global office of the OECD here in Istanbul, the first global office of the OECD. The Turkish government lobbied very hard to get it here. There were other candidates as well. Personally, I'm very happy that the choice fell on Istanbul. So I've been here now for 4 years, and I'm very delighted to be with you here under the auspices of the Sabancı Foundation. And I would like to extend my thanks to Ms. Güler Sabancı and the Sabancı Foundation for their generous hospitality today and the excellent organization and the setup of this event, also attracting so many different key players. Due to overlapping agendas, we unfortunately planned first to organize this event in the OECD Istanbul Center. But luckily we are able to host it today here together with the Sabancı Foundation, and it's a great pleasure and honor for me to be here today with you to discuss the strategic role of philanthropy in gender financing through OECD network of foundations working for development and the Sabancı dialogue. I mean, we see that we are living in a very tensed world these days. So when we have the Center of Philanthropy and the network of foundations, these two elements, together with the different foundations around the globe, they bring people and ideas together. And I think that is a very powerful mechanism for us to work together globally. Philanthropy has started to play an increasingly important role in financing development in recent years. I have worked practically my whole life in development aid, and I've seen budget cuts year in, year out. And we've seen the recent discussions in certain countries around the globe where they severely cut the official development assistance. So there, philanthropy suddenly becomes a relevant instrument and a relevant actor around the globe. As the OECD latest report on philanthropy has shown, private philanthropy funding provided for $68.2 billion between 2022 and 2023, equivalent to around 10% of the global development assistance. This is a significant contribution, although philanthropy funding remains concentrated with a limited number of regions, sectors, and international actors. Against this backdrop, collaboration is essential to advancing more effective and impactful philanthropic practice. The OECD, my organization, supports philanthropy in achieving greater impact by connecting ideas, evidence, and partnerships across and around the globe. We are firmly committed, me and also my team here in Istanbul, but the colleagues also, Esme, in headquarters, to further strengthen policy dialogue with philanthropy and our regional partners, making their contributions to development more visible through the Center on Philanthropy and linking them to high-level multilateral development discussions. Today's meeting exemplifies this effort, bringing together OECD experts, policymakers, and key stakeholders to share evidence and strategic insight and to explore promising novel approaches and engage in coalitions and partnerships. As I said when I opened that we are now 4 years here, I mean, the most important thing also, what I look in this room, which is, there's quite a lot of people, I mean, bringing people really together and talking to each other and coming up with new ideas and creating new networks is really valuable, especially in these days where we see that people are really living in their own bubbles more and more. You see it around the globe. And that's also the role of my office here in Istanbul. For 4 years, we've been working to cooperate with non-OECD members. So we have reached out as OECD member states to countries in Latin America, in Africa, in the MENA region, in Central Asia and Southeast Asia. So we have created a platform here in Istanbul. I guess everybody who came from abroad, when you land, most of the people land with Turkish Airlines, they say, welcome to the center of the world. That's also what I feel sometimes here, being in a part which is the center of the world. We bring cultures, people, policy experts together to discuss issues. We've worked with my team on various issues, including gender. It's been a very important theme in my team. We've recently had a study together with the UNDP. I saw a UNDP colleague here over there on the role of gender in green transition, the role of women in the workforce of new innovative green technologies. We've worked on connectivity. We've done a study on the middle corridor. That's the transport corridor from China to Europe. We've worked on climate issues. We've worked on responsible business conduct, also a very important issue. And then with my team together, we came up with an idea which we discussed with headquarters, is to see if we could organize a yearly crown jewel event. And we've started it last year. We have organized the first ministerial emerging market forum. Madam Sabancı, you mentioned that you are an emerging economy. And we did the first ministerial, that was April 2025, on the issue of connectivity. We gathered ministers from around the globe, Latin America, Arab countries, Asia. And that was the first ministerial OECD held in Turkey. And this year we did the second ministerial. And this year it was actually even more successful because we attracted even more ministers from around the globe to come to discuss issues on critical minerals. So what we basically do, and what I always try to promote also, not only as a professional but also as a person myself, is bringing people, cultures, ideas together and to come up with a policy dialogue with solutions. I think the subjects which we are discussing today here, and we have various experts, is a relevant issue. We're going to go into heavy times ahead of. It's not going to be an easy ride. That's also my personal belief. So because of that, we all need you. And reach out also to me and my team. I have my colleague Seda Sevgi, who is also here with me. We're very happy to engage with you. We wish everybody a very successful day. And again, I wanted to thank the Sabancı Foundation for offering us this opportunity. And we're also looking for close cooperation with the OECD Istanbul Center. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ashraf, and I love that message of bringing cultures, people, and ideas together, which is what really we're trying to do today. And happy birthday to the OECD Istanbul Center as well. So now it is my honor to introduce the chair of the Board of Trustees of Sabancı Foundation, Gula Sabancı, to set the scene for our discussions today. We're so grateful to the Sabancı Foundation for agreeing to co-organize this event with us and really shine a light on the efforts that the foundation has been doing in Turkey. So Ms. Sabancı needs no introduction, but if you may, I'll just add that she is the chair of the Board of Trustees of the Sabancı Foundation, the founding chair of Sabancı University Board of Trustees, and the chair of Sakib Sabancı Museum. As the first woman to lead Sabancı Holding, she served as chair from 2004 to 2025, driving the group's transformation in clean energy and business innovation. As an internationally recognized leader and philanthropist, she serves on the MIT Energy Initiative's External Advisory Board and is a member of the Trilateral Commission on Two-Side. She's received numerous international honors for her leadership, sustainability, and contributions to gender equality and social development. Ms. Sabancı, please, the floor is yours.
Yes, dear guests, I also congratulate the 4th birthday of OECD Istanbul Center. Hopefully, for the years to come, we will see more impact from OECD's existence in Istanbul. Well, welcome to Sabancı Center. It is a pleasure to welcome you all today to discuss the strategic role of philanthropy in advancing gender equality, as Ashraf has said. I would like to begin by thanking OECD and Ashraf for their leadership. For many years, the OECD has been an important source of knowledge and insight for philanthropy sector, as has been told. The OECD's philanthropy report, and particularly valuable to us, it draws on the data of hundreds of philanthropic organizations and helps us better understand where and how philanthropy can make a difference. At Sabancı Foundation, we share this commitment. We come from a long tradition of supporting gender equality. As most of you know here, our foundation was even founded by my grandmother, an Anatolian woman who donated all her wealth, and that is how we started. So as OECD, we believe that meaningful impact begins with evidence. Yes, evidence. Because if we cannot measure the impact, we cannot improve it. We are proud that Sabancı Foundation is the only foundation, unfortunately, from Turkey represented in the third and as well as the first and the second reports of the OECD's Private Philanthropy for Development report. We see this recognition as a reflection of the way we work and taking a long-term approach, building trust, learning from impacts, and being transparent. I want to thank all the Sabancı Foundation colleagues here, but it is not enough. We are supported by Sabancı Group. We are supported by the community. So I want to thank everybody who have contributed on this result. Gender equality has been one of the strategic priorities from the very beginning and especially over the last 20 years. There are people here, we were just talking outside when we started our first UN Together project when we were really advocated for the girls' human rights. We have consistently supported civil society organizations, programs, initiatives that expand opportunities for women and girls. We have never viewed gender equality as a standalone issue. We see it as a critical driver of progress across education, economic participation, social development, and increasingly, of course, the role in climate resilience. We believe meaningful change takes time and requires long-term commitment. Today, this perspective is more important than ever. We are living in a world shaped by growing uncertainty. Climate change, economic pressures, and geopolitical tensions are creating increasingly complex challenges. OECD's analysis also reminds us that we are operating in a very different funding environment today. Traditional development funding is becoming more constrained. As resources declined and challenges become more complex, philanthropy has an even more important role to play. The future of philanthropy will depend increasingly on collaboration. This is also a clear message from the OECD report. No institution can address today's challenges alone. The next chapter will require stronger partnerships, greater coordination, and more shared investment. This is particularly important for gender equality, where the funding gap is still very high. Ultimately, progress will depend not only on how much we invest, but how well we work together, as Ashraf said. Turkey, my country, has a long, strong culture of giving and solidarity, which roots into a long philanthropic tradition that goes way back to Ottoman era. Through our work, we engage closely with women organizations across the country, and some of them are represented here today. We see their potential, their creativity, their resilience, and dedication to address the challenges facing their communities. The capacity, expertise, and commitment are there already. At the same time, Turkey continues to face, as you may heard, the impacts of large-scale displacements, natural disasters, and climate change. My country is not considered a poor country, but it is also not rich enough to address challenges of this scale on its own. This is why international philanthropy remains important. When local capacity is matched with international support, we can achieve greater impact for women and girls. Today, we are fortunate to have leading philanthropic organizations and partners gathered in this room, and we will listen to them after me. I hope this meeting will be more than a discussion about findings. I hope this platform will create opportunities for new partnerships, new ideas, and new collaborations. My wish that the next OECD report will reflect on stronger collaboration and greater support for gender equality. I thank you all. Thank you once again to OECD for their valuable partnership and guidance. And thank you all for joining us today. I wish we have a productive and inspiring discussions for future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Sabancı. Thank you for reminding us of Turkey's culture of philanthropic giving and the trailblazing history of the foundation. And I think we've got our homework now for the next OECD report, as you just said. So with that, it is my pleasure to introduce our third opening speaker this morning, and that is the director of the Development Center, Raga Arnadottir. So unfortunately, Raga could not be here with us today as there's a governing board meeting of the Development Center. However, Raga is a firm gender defender, as she says in her own words, and she's absolutely delighted to share a video message with us today. So Raga, previously, before she took the role of director of the Development Center, she served as Iceland's Minister of Industry and Commerce and a member of Parliament, following senior advisory roles in government and positions within the Trade Council of Iceland. So I will, I think if we can share the video of Raga, I'll let her speak. Thank you.
Dear Guler, dear Ashraf, distinguished speakers, colleagues, and friends, thank you for the opportunity to address you here today. And let me begin by saying how sorry I am not to be with you in person for this joint event of the OECD Development Center's network of foundations working for development, netFWD, and the Sabancı Foundation on strengthening philanthropy's strategic role in gender financing. As a valued member of the Development Center's governing board, Turkey is an important partner in our work, and I would have welcomed the opportunity to contribute to what promises to be a rich and forward-looking discussion. The theme of today's dialogue could not be more timely. Around the world, support for gender equality is facing new headwinds. Development budgets are under pressure, priorities are shifting, and in some places, hard-won gains are being questioned. And yet, the need for action has never been clearer. When funding for gender equality declines, the consequences are real. Opportunities shrink, essential services become harder to access, progress slows, and those already facing the greatest barriers are often the first to pay the price. The numbers tell a sobering story. Official development assistance declined by more than 8% between 2023 and 2024, and fell again by 23.1% in 2025. Funding for gender equality has been hit even harder. Bilateral aid supporting gender equality objectives has declined significantly, 13% from 2023 to 24, reaching its lowest level in several years. These trends should concern us all, but they should also motivate us, because moments like this are precisely when leadership matters the most. Leadership is not only about protecting past achievements, it's about finding new ways to shape the future. new ways to mobilize resources, new ways to build partnerships, and new ways to accelerate progress. And this is why today's conversation is so important. At the OECD, and of course at the OECD Development Center, gender equality remains at the heart of policy discussions and decision-making, while strengthening the evidence base needs to drive meaningful change. And this commitment is reflected across our work. On 8th and 9th of July, the OECD will host its biennial Forum on Gender Equality. The forum will focus on how digital technologies, data, and artificial intelligence can be harnessed to advance gender equality while mitigating the risk of deepening existing disparities. The OECD Development Center also continues to strengthen the evidence base for action through the Social Institution and Gender Index, or SIGI, which tracks gender-based discrimination across 179 countries. Its latest research on masculinity and gender equality reminds us that gender equality is not only about women. Restrictive gender norms contribute to violence against women, limit women's economic opportunities, but also can harm men's own health and well-being. The message is clear. Lasting progress requires changing institutions, rewriting norms, and expanding opportunities for everyone. And this is where philanthropy has an increasingly important role to play. Philanthropic organizations bring strengths that are especially valuable in today's environment. The OECD Development Center on Philanthropy's latest flagship report, Private Philanthropy for Development, finds that cross-border and domestic philanthropic organizations provided approximately $5.2 billion for gender equality between 2020 and 2023. This funding cannot replace official development assistance, nor should it, but it can complement in important ways. Philanthropic organizations are often able to provide flexible and longer-term support to local feminist organizations. They can take risks. They can test innovative approaches, work through collaborative funds and partnerships, and integrate gender considerations across other priority areas, such as climate, health, and education. And these are significant strengths at a time when the development finance landscape is becoming increasingly constrained. At the same time, our findings point to a considerable untapped potential. Foundations engaged in co-financing partnerships currently allocate only around 1% of their funding to gender equality initiatives. And this tells us something important. Many organizations recognize gender equality as a priority. The challenge now is to place it at the center of financing decisions, because if there's one lesson from decades of work on gender equality, it's that progress depends on connection, collaboration, and collective action. No government can deliver systemic change alone. No foundation can deliver it alone. No international organization can deliver it alone. Progress happens when different actors bring their strengths together around a shared objective. That is why the main questions before us today are not only how to mobilize more resources for gender equality, but how to mobilize them more effectively. How can philanthropy work more effectively alongside governments, development finance institutions, and civil society? How can we better align our efforts to maximize impact? And how can we ensure that gender equality remains central, not peripheral, to broader discussions about development, resilience, and inclusive growth? These are precisely the questions that make today's discussion so valuable. The expertise gathered for today's roundtable gives me confidence that new ideas, new partnerships, and new solutions will emerge from today's discussion. I wish you a productive and inspiring exchange, and I look very much forward to the insights and recommendations that will come from it. Thank you.
Super, thank you, Raga. So now we're going to move into presenting the results of the report to act as a grounding for a conversation that the panel will have afterwards. So hopefully my clicker is going to work. And yes, that's me again, Esme, so I'm a policy analyst at OECD netFWD. So for those of you who are unfamiliar or who want a recap, OECD netFWD is the OECD's network for foundations working for development. So we've been at the OECD Development Centre since 2012, and during that time we've become the nexus on global philanthropy. So we bring together large cross-border foundations with domestic actors, bringing them together in conversation, as Raga said, with other development finance providers. So that can be governments, development finance institutions, multilateral development banks, and development agencies. We're very much rooted in data and evidence, as is all of the OECD. And that allows us to elevate philanthropic voices in multilateral processes and highlight the good work that philanthropy is doing. So this is just another visualization. So at the top there, you can see the data and evidence that is led by the OECD Centre on Philanthropy. So that's the largest global database on how philanthropy supports development. That feeds into peer learning and dialogue. So we convene regular multi-stakeholder data-driven dialogues like today. And again, that allows us to position globally. So this year, we're really delighted to have the first ever G7 engagement group for philanthropy, the F7, and we're chairing that group to really bring philanthropy as a collective into these high-level decision-making spaces for development. So what does this look like? What does this model look like when it comes to gender financing or gender funding? So the topic of our conversation today. So this has long been a priority for netFWD members and partners, and this is because we see it in the data. So on the data and evidence, we can show how foundations support gender through using the OECD's gender marker, for example, and also looking at specific sectors on how philanthropy supports. And I'll go into a little bit more detail there. We also have a dedicated policy paper on how philanthropic foundations support gender equality and women's empowerment. Today is an excellent example, as I mentioned, of how we bring philanthropy using this data into conversation with other actors. But earlier this year, we were delighted to have Nevgul participate in a dedicated conversation on gender at our annual meeting alongside Co-Impact and Agence Française de Développement. And last year, we had a dedicated working group meeting on rethinking gender financing in light of ODA cuts. In terms of global influence, so how this works, specifically for gender, for example, at COP28 a couple of years ago, we launched a call to action to accelerate gender-responsive climate action at the COP28 Business and Philanthropy Climate Forum. So that's just a little insight into how the network works and how we bring these strands together and contextualize the data that we collect. Okay, so here's what we've all been waiting for. The Private Philanthropy for Development, 3rd edition, taking stock of philanthropy's contribution to development. So first, I just want to remind everyone why we actually need data on private philanthropy for development. So as we're all aware in this room, I'm sure, after continuously increasing for 2 decades, official development assistance fell sharply in 2025. So that's a 23.1% decrease over 2024. And new figures released by the OECD just last Friday predict that this is going to increase an additional 7%. We've heard that gender is particularly affected by this. So you might remember Raga mentioned the 13% drop in ODA for gender. Very concerning. So at the same time, we have international momentum about making philanthropy's role more visible. This is arguably long overdue, but we see, for example, in the Seville commitment last year, that there's a concern to address growing fragmentation and lack of coordination among different partners, and really an invitation for philanthropy to partner, as our speakers have mentioned, with other actors for development finance. So the problem is that we can't actually bring philanthropy into those partnerships unless we have the databases there to facilitate them. So these are just some key global trends from the report, first off. So as we can see, from 2020 to 23, a total of 506 foundations that reported to our survey recorded 68.2 billion in financing for development. So there's an upward trend there. However, philanthropy remains highly concentrated. So US-based foundations continue to account for about 50% total of philanthropic funding, and domestic contributions, on the other hand, are increasing. So the report maps several domestic markets, in particular China, India, and Mexico, and we see that they contributed a total of 15.4 billion. And at the same time, we see that philanthropy is really complementary to ODA. So whereas philanthropy concentrates on health, education, government, and civil society, during the time period that we're looking at in this report, 2020 to 23, we see ODA pivot away to focus more on COVID-19 response, Ukraine, etc. So the report, based on this data, it has both a financial component, which I'll talk about now, and an organizational component. So it allows us to see the scale and direction of philanthropic funding during this time, and also to look at the kind of processes, practices, and challenges for philanthropy in dispersing that money and partnering with others. Just on the complementarity with ODA, I just want to reiterate this point. So we're not saying that philanthropy can replace ODA by any means. So you'll see here a kind of visual depiction. ODA for the period was 769.8 billion. Cross-border philanthropy, 52.8 billion, and domestic philanthropy, as I just mentioned, 15.4. So that's 68.2 as a collective. It's not going to replace ODA. It's about 10%. Arguably, it's probably closer to 20% if you take out things like in-donor refugee costs, but it's still not going to replace it. So what we need to do is maximize the input and the value of philanthropy to make those partnerships more effective. All right, so now let's look specifically at gender. In the report. So we can see that philanthropic funding for gender equality increased over the period, and we'll get into that in a little while. So it's over 5 billion over the period, as we heard from Raga, whereas gender-related ODA actually remains relatively stable. So it even dips by 1 million from 55 to 54, for example, in 2023. Philanthropic funding is highly concentrated. So it's philanthropic funding specifically dedicated to gender, which we'll see in a little bit what those subsectors mean, is 4 times more concentrated than ODA. And this is dominated in particular by 2 American foundations that provide 2/3 of this funding. In terms of geographical diversity, Africa accounts for almost half of all targeted funding, whereas Asia, for example, only represents about 15%. And there's a really heavy prioritization of health issues here. So 81% of this funding is targeting sexual and reproductive health and rights. All right, so I mentioned that philanthropy places a significant emphasis on supporting gender. So philanthropic funding, as you can see there from the graph, increased over the period, whereas ODA remained relatively stable, even dipping a bit at the end there. So when we talk about gender-specific funding, we are referring to 4 purpose codes, and these are family planning, reproductive healthcare, women's rights organizations, and efforts to end violence against women and girls. So relatively, we can see that gender-specific funding accounted for 8% of all philanthropic funding, so the dark blue at the bottom there. Whereas for ODA, this looks more like 2%. Domestic philanthropic funding represented about 2% of gender financing. So this is for both gender-specific and gender-related, and that's 2% of the whole. So it's really concentrated among international funders at the moment. That could also just be because we don't have the data. We don't have sufficient numbers of data on how domestic philanthropy globally is supporting gender. Okay, so actually you can see here when we come to gender-specific funding, so those 4 subsectors that I mentioned before, the top donors of philanthropic and ODA are actually comparable. in terms of their levels of funding for this. So you can see that Gates, for example, and Susan T. Buffett Foundation contributed 2.1 billion, 1.3 billion respectively. So that's actually looking at similar levels from ODA donors like the UK and Canada at 1.6 and 1.4. I will make the point, though, that even when we talk about proportionally philanthropy dedicating a higher share of gender-specific funding, when we look at overall volumes, again, obviously ODA is much higher. Okay, so in terms of the concentration, so we mentioned there's a risk in terms of there are a limited number of gender funders that dominate this space. So in an era of a kind of increasing volatility for gender funding, it's important that we really try and diversify the number of actors supporting gender. Same with recipient countries. So we can see that there's a really high focus on Africa in both philanthropic funding and ODA gender-specific funding. In terms of countries, India was the largest single country recipient. And that's both for domestic and cross-border. Okay, and when we come to the sectors, so philanthropic funding, as I mentioned at the beginning, it prioritizes sexual reproductive health and rights. So that's things like family planning, reproductive health care. We also see that there's a heavy focus on women's rights organizations, movements, and government institutions. On the ODA side, it's much more varied, and this is why ODA has more of a focus on gender-related funding. So it looks at social protection, education is on there as well, whereas philanthropy is much more concentrated on the health side. So in terms of a deep dive on domestic philanthropy's funding for gender, so it's also quite concentrated, and these are the top 14 organizations from the report focusing on gender. And here you have also Sabancı Foundation with 4.3 million in funding there. And these domestic foundations are, again, in our database, they're based in India, Qatar, Mexico, Venezuela, China, Turkey, and these lead the efforts. Again, domestic philanthropic funding prioritize reproductive health care. So it mirrors overall trends with a strong focus on health and family planning. And then it also places a strong emphasis on women's rights and institutional support, which I think is really interesting, given kind of local links. So why we're here today, so Sabancı Foundation is a really good example of actually contextualizing this data and bringing it to life. So through consistent reporting to the OECD Center on Philanthropy, we can see that Sabancı Foundation is 40th out of 164 foundations at the global level that provide gender-specific funding. It's the 14th, as I just showed, domestic philanthropy at the global level in terms of gender funding, and it's within the top 15 foundations that focus more strongly on gender. So 70% of the portfolio almost is allocated towards gender equality, which is a fantastic finding. We also, at the beginning, mentioned the fact that COP31 is going to take place here in Turkey later this year. And Ms. Sabancı also mentioned that climate resilience and integrating gender into climate is a priority for the foundation. The foundation is a climate champion. It's the only foundation in Turkey to sign the International Philanthropy Commitment on Climate Change. And on the right-hand side there, you can see areas of the foundation's portfolio that it supports. So transformation of social norms, participation of women in social and economic life, and improving access to education opportunities for girls and women, which I think there are some reports outside for those of you that are interested in learning more about that program, which is entering its second phase. So just to kind of show you here philanthropic support to the gender and climate financing nexus, which we're talking more and more about increasingly how to integrate gender considerations into other policy windows. These broadly mirror the findings that we've seen so far. So overall funding for the period reached 1.2 billion. philanthropic gender climate funding was dominated again by a small group of foundations. So we need actually more foundations to start thinking about this, how to integrate gender into their climate portfolios and vice versa. Funding was primarily directed towards agriculture, research, and environmental policy interventions, and Africa received nearly half of this funding, with Asia the second largest recipient at about 12%. And if you're interested in looking at the report, you'll find that we calculate this using markers. So I use the gender marker that we've seen before, where you can declare whether a project has a principal or a significant focus on gender, and the same with the Rio markers that the OECD uses. So you can see whether a policy has a significant or a principal focus on climate. So we cross both of those markers together to give a picture of how foundations are actually funding at the intersection. So I mentioned that the report and the database is composed of 2 surveys. I've just spoken about the financial one. Now I'm going to talk about the organizational one. So in addition to the scale and direction of philanthropic funding, we also want to know how foundations are actually funding, how this works in practice. So here we've got some of the barriers to greater investment in gender equality. So when we're thinking about how do we get more foundations engaged and motivated, we can see here that actually the main barrier is that gender equality is just not seen as a programmatic priority. So I think maybe that's something that potentially the panelists can kind of help interrogate is why is that still the case? We heard earlier that it's central to a lot of development indicators. So why is it seen as not a priority by a lot of foundations still? Okay, so we're also talking about co-financing today, and that's been mentioned. So this is another area that the organizational part of the report focuses on. We have 62 organizations that provided detailed information on their collaboration initiatives, their collaborative initiatives. And this is a total of 97 co-finance projects and partnerships with 311 external development actors across 17 sectors. So this accounts for a total of 1.4 billion allocated across these different initiatives. And you can see from the bubbles here, we've got some representatives of who philanthropy is partnering with, And we can see from the central one that actually philanthropy partners with other philanthropies mainly at 38%. We see much less partnership with domestic governance, with development finance institution and aid agencies that I think is at about 3%. So that's also what we're doing at the OECD netFWD. We're looking at why this is, how can we break down those barriers between philanthropies and other providers of development finance to actually operationalize some of these commitments that we hear called in international policy processes like the Seville commitment. So we can't just say philanthropy has to partner with other actors. We have to show where the gaps are, what the opportunities are, how that's happening already, and where we can actually make change as policy actors. So, Raga also mentioned this in her speech. So we have co-financing flows by sector. So this is reported in our, this is what we have in our database. So health is by far the largest sector in terms of co-financing flows. And overall, there's a really heavy concentration in terms of the sectors that are targeted. Gender receives about 1%. Okay, so that's approximative. We're looking at about 1% here. And really, I guess that's a question and a challenge for us all. So why does gender receive so little in terms of co-financing flows? And are there opportunities, for example, to insert gender into some of the larger co-financing flows like health in a more structured way moving forward? So recommendations to boost foundations' commitment to equality. We need to strengthen and diversify funding coalitions. So we've seen consistently that there is a real heavy concentration in who is funding gender and where. So how can we bring in a greater diversity of actors, including domestic philanthropies, to work in funding coalitions with other foundations who share the same gender-related priorities? And this is especially important, I think, when we consider that ODA is really only going in one direction. We can't be reliant on governments to continue to provide this support. We need to show where and how philanthropy can act also with others. Favour flexible and long-term funding. So we've seen how philanthropy supports women's rights movements and local feminist organisations, and that's particularly the case for domestic philanthropies as well. So these organisations typically need flexible and long-term funding to actually go about their long-term societal change and enact that in practice. Again, target areas where philanthropy adds value, focus on key subsectors for gender equality, and pinpoint innovative solutions where philanthropy can act as a catalyst. So what does that look like in practice? And that's where the network element comes in, where the dialogue piece comes in. We need to hear what's happening. And then, of course, improve data and transparency. I hope I've made the case why it's so important to have this data to show. I mean, everyone loves the data, but it's a different question when we're actually sort of going about trying to encourage people to report. So we really need better capture, a full range of actors to inform decision-making for gender moving forward. So if you'd like to learn more about the report, there's a QR code on the screen there. I encourage you to have a look. We're looking at putting the full database online, so you'll be able to go through and see all that raw data for yourself. And with that, I am going to now introduce our panel, who are going to talk specifically about leveraging philanthropy's catalytic value for gender. So I think we are having our panelists come to the stage equipped with their headsets. So while that happens and while colleagues are able to bring the chairs to the stage, I will introduce our moderator. So Swati Deepak is going to lead our panel discussion, Leveraging Philanthropy's Catalytic Value for Gender. Swati advises foundations and philanthropic families on strategies and redistribution while supporting social enterprises and arts initiatives. She previously led the With and For Girls Collective and Stars Foundation and is a founding member of philanthropy and social justice initiatives, including Shake the Table, which has mobilized over $1 billion for global justice movements. She's a senior visiting fellow at the London School of Economics and serves on boards and advisory councils of several international philanthropic organizations. Swati, over to you.
Hopefully you can all hear me. Thank you so much, Esme. Thank you to the OECD, and thank you so much to all of the team at Sabancı as well for all of the support and for your beautiful hospitality and welcoming all of us here to Istanbul and to Turkey. I'm very excited about the conversation today. I will wait for my seat and then I'll call up our brilliant panelists to come and join for the session. So we're going to be really talking and reflecting on everything that our brilliant speakers this morning have already spoken to. What does this mean? What do we really need to do to also change and support philanthropy's catalytic role in channeling resources to better accelerate progress towards gender equality, especially in the turbulent times that we're in at the moment? As I reflect on all of this, I think about how we have so much change in the normative frameworks that we've all existed for such a long time. We've had, a very, a foundation of human rights, of international courts, of ODA commitments, and all of that seems to be in turmoil at the moment. And so I think the role of private capital in that moment is extremely important. I'm going to invite the different speakers to come up and take their seats. So first of all, I'll invite Ms. Nevgul Bilsen Safkan. I'm sorry for pronouncing anything wrong. She is the General Manager of Sabancı Foundation and the Vice President of the Sabancı Foundation. She has more than 30 years of leadership experience in finance, business, and philanthropy. She holds senior executive roles at Arthur Andersen, Foundation, the Sabancı Group, and Technosa, and she's become a leading voice in social impact and non-profit leadership. She serves on the boards and advisory councils of prominent national and international organizations focused on education, gender equality, disability rights, and philanthropy.
Thank you.
Nevgul. I'll also invite Kurt Pellerman. He's the Director of Global Platforms at AVPN, which is the Asia Venture Philanthropy Network. He's the Director of Global Markets there, where he leads cross-regional collaboration and Global Leadership Academy. He's got extensive experience spanning philanthropy, social impact, international development, and he's held senior roles at Impact Europe, Synergos, Médecins Sans Frontières, and the United Nations and Co-Impact. He's based in Belgium, and he works to strengthen global partnerships and advance collaboration solutions for change. Welcome, Kurt. I'll also invite Nilofer Menon. She's the Deputy Director of Gender Equality at the Gates Foundation. That's where she advances strategic initiatives in women's health and livelihoods across low-income contexts. Previously, she was a partner at the Bridgespan Group, where she advised nonprofits, governments, and philanthropies on gender, education, health, and climate. She also serves on the board of AMNA, a nonprofit supporting the mental health of displaced women and children. Welcome, Nilofer. And finally, Emily Schreier, who's the head of development at Girls Not Brides, where she leads global resource mobilization efforts to advance girls' rights and end child marriage. With nearly 2 decades of experience in gender equality, philanthropy, and strategic partnerships, she has held leadership roles at CARE and European Women's Lobby. A Fulbright scholar and social entrepreneur, Emily advocates for more equitable and sustainable approaches to financing gender justice. So welcome, Emily. And, Ashraf, you said earlier that Turkey and Istanbul is often said to be the center of the world, and it's great to have such an incredible panel representing global philanthropy, regional, domestic, and coming from all corners of the world for this really important conversation today. One of the things that I've been reflecting on and has been so well articulated by all of the speakers and also shown within the statistics is, we're in a time of declining commitments, whether they're ODA commitments or even private philanthropic commitments towards gender equality or to development more broadly. It feels as if the world that many of us were growing in at feels like it's much further into the horizon and into the distance than we thought it would be at this time in our lives. And those headwinds, whether it's with, and I read a report the other day that said 70% of the world lives in some form of authoritarian rule at the moment. And so we are seeing a slide back in many ways to our basic and fundamental rights. At the same time, I also think about what opportunities there are. We're at a time where, philanthropy and development was often dominated by global north countries. And of course, they continue to have an important role and a responsibility in their role in furthering development around the world. But we're also seeing much more in terms of domestic, regional philanthropy, and also wealth being generated outside of global north context. And for me, that's an exciting opportunity. The other thing is that we're in this moment called the Great Wealth Transfer, which some of you may have heard about, but it's the transfer of approximately $84 trillion, which over the next sort of 10 to 15 years, depending on what report you read, will transfer from one generation to the next. And the predictions are that 2/3 of that transfer of wealth will actually land in the hands of women for the first time. And I only hope that the women coming into wealth have the same foresight that your grandmother had, Madame Sabancı, for actually putting their money into philanthropy and focusing so permanently on the work of gender equality. But I want to ask our panelists, our incredible panelists, But just with some of these headwinds, this reduced ODA commitments, the reduction in some of the philanthropic trends, but also some of these opportunities, new wealth developing, transfers of wealth. You know, we've also got large IPOs coming to play with founders taking giving pledges to philanthropy as well. What do you think are the opportunities for private philanthropy in this moment to accelerate gender financing? And what would you like to share with folks in the room? I'll come to you first.
I'll start first. Thank you so much, Swati, and welcome to Turkey. It's wonderful to see so many stakeholders from across civil society today. And I want to start with a warm welcome to Sabancı Center as one of the hosts of the gatherings. And I'm excited about to share, to think, and to learn together today. So let me begin by recalling Sabancı Foundation's purpose statement. Our purpose is clear. We're supporting societal development for a more equitable and sustainable future. As one of Turkey's leading philanthropic organizations for over 50 years, we've been working towards this vision by bringing together stakeholders, diverse stakeholders, investing into long-term solutions, and also fostering meaningful partnerships that create the lasting impact. Gender equality has always been one of our core priorities at the foundation. We believe that lasting progress in our other focus areas, which are education, climate change, is only possible when gender inequality is addressed through an intersectional approach. This commitment is reflected both in our strategy and funding, and also we are very proud to be represented as the only foundation from Turkey in the OECD Private Philanthropy for Development report, and also which shows that more than 70% of the funding is for advancing the gender equality. The scale and the complexity of today's challenges require that we work together. No single organization is able to solve these social complex issues alone. So, is it truly possible to bring together diverse stakeholders and around a shared goal and sustain collaboration over time? Is it possible? From our experience, yes, I'm gonna say it is. And I wanna share two examples from our experience with you today. One is from the earliest and most successful partnerships, and one from our recent one. As Ms. Sabancı also mentioned, our first large-scale collaboration was a United Nations joint program in Turkey to focus on advancing women and girls' rights, human rights. Launched in 2006, it was the first UN joint program in Turkey. And it brought together the government institutions, UN agencies, civil society organizations, and the Sabancı Foundation around a shared effort. And that program continued successfully for 10 years. This experience showed us that the value of bringing together diverse actors from across sectors to work towards a shared goal. And beyond the partnership itself, it helped make gender equality a mainstream issue in Turkey. It contributed to the establishment of gender equality units in public organizations and strengthened collaboration among stakeholders. Our most recent example in Partnerships is our flagship Big Impact program targeting young women who are need status, neither educated nor employed or trained. Turkey, unfortunately, has the highest rate among OECD countries. OECD average for need women is 14%. Turkey has 37%. So nearly 3.2 million need women are in Turkey. So to address this critical challenge, we launched the program in 2022 with the partnership of UNDP and the relevant ministries this time. The project showed how different stakeholders can work together to support the empowerment and the employability of need women in Turkey. So far, we have reached more than 10,000 need women, and we are proud that 1,100 of them gained employment through the collective effort. And also our SROI impact indicated that for every 1 Turkish lira we invested into the program, we generated 4 Turkish lira social value. So beyond the numbers, it has created real impact on the ground. These contributions create impact that no single actor could achieve alone. Our first lesson from this experience was that complex social challenges require long-term partnerships over a shared purpose. The mutual trust is important, and also the complementary strengths. The second lesson we want to share is the importance of the local actors, mobilizing resources locally. For over 20 years now, our grant program has supported nearly 100 projects, gender equality projects, by women's-led organizations in Turkey. And our 20-year gender equality report indicated that 41% of supported organizations received their first grant from Sabancı Foundation. Later, 60% secured additional funding. So we believe local organizations are the closest ones, both to the challenges, but also to the solutions. When local actors are empowered, change becomes more sustainable and more resilient. So at the heart of our work is empowerment approach. We believe women and girls should not be seen as beneficiaries to any program, but as active change agents. We listen to women and girls in our programs to understand their needs and to work together for the solutions. For instance, before launching the Big Impact project on Need Young Women, for over 2 years we conducted questionnaires, surveys, interviews to understand better their needs and their barriers. In other words, we designed the project together. We continue to shape it together with them. It's about creating the conditions for women where they can create the opportunities for themselves and for the others. So to conclude, lasting impact happens when different actors come together around a shared purpose, when local organizations are empowered, and when the people most affected are treated as change agents, part of the solution. For us, this is the foundation of the meaningful partnerships and the impact.
Thank you so much, Nevgul. That was a really interesting sort of look at the way and the approach of the foundation. And I think the things that I'm thinking about after listening to you is, you know, that really, I think in this time of rupture, this time of like change around the world, having an organization like Sabancı, which is looking at partnerships that are both with civil society actors, with local actors, with individuals themselves, but also with state departments, with UN agencies, and with other kind of financing, shows the different pools of capital that are required at this time. At the LSE, we often talk about, within the Marshall Institute, we often talk about 5 styles of capital. So, of course, when we think about philanthropy, we often think philanthropic capital, how much money are we giving? But there is investment capital, where we're putting our investments, where our endowments as private foundations might be sat. What's the cultural capital that we have? What stories are we telling? How are we changing dynamics? So I think your experience of bringing in and elevating the voices of local organizations helps demonstrate that expertise to others in the field. The political capital that you have, the engagement that you have with different international, bilateral, multilateral actors. And then lastly, social capital. Who are you telling and what are you talking about? So I think the examples that you brought was really about that sort of multi-pronged capital approach and how we need to actually leverage all of those in these moments to really accelerate. Kurt, what are your reflections around this moment in time and what you think are the opportunities given the headwinds or the changes?
Thank you. First of all, it's interesting when I look at the screen, there's one man on the podium is put in the middle, in the center. So it raises interesting questions. What's the role of men in gender? I'm thinking, what can I complement here? And I think gender is systemic, it's strategic, but ultimately it's also very personal. It concerns all of us, and if I look at myself, I have a wife, I have 2 daughters, they're 23 and 21, and they're all 3 extremely passionate about unleashing the power and the energy of women in the world. And so when I travel and they say, please take some of that passion. So I think that's an important one. We need to continue to embrace the passion for the topic. But I would say next to their passion, they're also angry. They're angry about how the world has failed women for so many generations and still now. And so they also invite me to take their anger with them. So I take a bit of their anger to this place also. So I think those kind of personal elements, that they continue to be important. Let's continue to connect with the emotions and with the values and not limit ourselves to the strategies and the programs and the data. I think they're important. It's an and. A second element is, and you mentioned so many valuable things, I'm not gonna add to them, but I'm 30 years in the philanthropic space. And I think already my first conference 30 years ago, it was about collaboration. Collaboration is important, it's key, we need to do, everybody applauds, everybody says great.
Still the same.
29 years ago, 28 years ago, 27 years ago. And so I think there's been progress definitely on collaboration, but still not far from enough. And I thought for many years, if everybody agrees, and it's not happening, there's something we're not seeing. And I think, for me, it starts with accepting how difficult it is to collaborate. It's really very tough. And I think I've been in a lot of places and conferences where it's like, okay, you have some best practices, 5 tips to do it, and when you do it, heaven will appear. It's not as simple. And I think the key elements of collaboration, or the complexities of collaboration, is that it's different. It's between people, but also between organizations. They have different missions, different strategies, different reporting requirements, different change theories. So how do you combine them together? And I think the key for me is to move from, like in a lot of things, I think we need to move from scarcity mindset to abundance mindset. And when you look into collaboration with a scarcity mindset, you think it's a give and take. I make a compromise, I give something, I can take something. Whereas if you can acknowledge an abundance mindset that is end, then it's a very different story. If you see what collaboration, the resources it can mobilize, and when you bring a network, and you bring technological expertise, and you bring other things. So I think that's if I look at AVPN, I think that's a mindset we try to have, to embrace with our partners in the pooled funds that we have, in other collaboratives that we set up, is to try to, set also the values and the passion, to bring them in, but complement them also with an abundance mindset.
No, you're really right in that, and I often think about the phrase that's in English, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. So I think that, it's a real reflection on that. And I hope in the panel that people will share what has worked and what hasn't in terms of accelerating some collaboration. Niloufar, I'll come to you with any reflections on this moment in time, and what do you think are some of the opportunities or challenges ahead for us?
Absolutely. Before I start sharing those perspectives, I want to thank the Sabancı Foundation and OECD for inviting us to Istanbul. I think this place is magical. So I always just wake up in the morning happy, and I'm not a morning person. So I really appreciate this opportunity. But like Madam Sabancı, I also believe in data and evidence. So when I talk about these opportunities, I'm going to try and add evidence to them. You spoke about the great wealth transfer with a big chunk of trillions going to women. Women don't only give more, they give better. They're not just more generous, they're more courageous. And that, I think, is the opportunity over here. If you just look at the amount that McKinsey Scott gave last year, she gave more money than Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, and Larry Ellison have given in their whole lifetime. That is evidence, right? If you look at the way women give, they collaborate more, they innovate more, they don't give short grants. Like you said in your speech, they understand that for enduring change, you have to be patient. It takes time, and they are ready to give that time. They are not asking organizations to submit reports every 3 months. So that way of giving, not just more effectively, but more compassionately, more empathically, I think that will change gender for us. So I see that women inheriting, in the US, about $100 trillion, out of which it is certain that 18 trillion will go to philanthropy, is a huge opportunity. I think AI is a big opportunity. AI has its risks, and I am happy to talk to anyone about those as well, because I completely understand how AI has increased some violence against women. There have been more online cases of women facing harassment because of deep fakes. But at the Gates Foundation, we have been able to develop an AI-assisted ultrasound, which can work in places where there is no specialist infrastructure, so that women who have high-risk pregnancies can be diagnosed. It has made something that we could have never dreamt about many years ago possible, right? And I think the companies who are at the frontier of AI, if you look at the Anthropic and if you look at OpenAI Foundation, they have committed a lot of dollars to philanthropy, to development. So it's on us, I think, people, we're the converted crowd, right? We believe that gender is a critical priority. It's for us to make sure that these issues remain salient, that they're spoken about. And I'm going to counter Kurt's point here. It's not passion, it is an economic case. If you don't invest in women, you are doing bad business. So I will say that it is a moral imperative, but it is an economic imperative. Closing the women's health gap can add $1 trillion to the economy by 2030. That is powerful. So people who are sitting on the sidelines waiting to grow a conscience, forget about the conscience. Focus on your brain. Invest in women. Women are the ones who are going to bring you your returns. Women are the ones who are going to take you into a better world. And for me, that's where the opportunity is.
Thank you so much, Niloufar. It made me also think, one of the foundations I sit on the board of, the Emerging Markets Foundation. It's made up of emerging market finance institutions, and all the rest of my board members aren't like me. They all come from finance and investing. And my co-chair, who's the co-CEO for Goldman Sachs International, he's always like, it's not a moral debate, it's an economic debate. We have to invest in women, we have to invest in girls, and especially from an emerging market financial lens. Like, you're not going to get any of your returns on investment unless equality, education, health outcomes, and labor force participation increases. So, I definitely am a feminist. I come much more from the moral perspective, but it's always important to hear that there are multi sort of lenses to this. And I think what you're all demonstrating is that we actually need multiple different conversations in order to create multiple entry points for different and diverse actors to come to sessions and meetings like us, because many of us may be already the converted, and we need to bring new people through the door in collaboration with us. Emily, your reflections.
Sure, thank you so much. It's such a privilege to be here today. I'm representing Girls Not Brides, which is a global organization, the largest membership organization of local organizations working to end child marriage. We have 1,400 local organizations working in over 100 countries. So I'm going to try and reflect some of the issues that they're facing in my intervention. Every 3 seconds, a girl under the age of 18 is married. That's 12 million girls a year. Child marriage remains one of the most pervasive human rights and gender equality issues of our time. Many of you work on this issue. You know full well the scale of this issue. It robs girls not only of their bodily autonomy, their basic rights, often their lives. It also costs the world $175 billion a year in lost economic productivity. When all of those girls stop working, they stop contributing at that young age. So over the past 15 years, Girls Not Brides has built a movement of local organizations working collectively for change. And this movement has driven down the child marriage rate over 15 years by 15%, from 1 in 4 girls being married to 1 in 5 girls being married. And we've done that together as a movement through a dual pathway: sustained financial investment on one hand and locally driven collective action on the other. Yet today the movement is facing this paradox, which we're hearing all about, which is the finance and funding crisis. And I wanted to draw attention to 3 ways we're seeing this affect our members on the ground. So the first is competition. So movements are, as we know, only made possible through collective action. And Girls Not Brides actually doesn't fund local organizations. We fund coalitions of local organizations working together to advance national policy change. And nothing kills collective action faster than that scarcity mindset you're talking about, and that infighting and that competition. The second is this fixation on short-term outcomes that we're seeing amongst all kinds of donors today. So we're seeing this push towards outcome-based financing, increased focus on short-term results, and donors are under scrutiny from their stakeholders, right? Everybody is under pressure to demonstrate return on investment when there's less funding. But that is incompatible with the kind of systematic change that we are trying to achieve within gender equality and as a movement. And then the third thing that's happening is creativity is being killed and exclusivity is being enforced. So what I hear the most in our ecosystem is how hard it is for organizations to open doors of gender funders, even gender funders, right? Because donors are locking down, they're only funding their current grantees, they're in this holding pattern. And in the meantime, innovation, which is at the front lines of the movement, is being lost. And behind these three trends is one common theme, which we're hearing in all the interventions, which is fear, right? Everyone is paralyzed by fear. We're in a time of polycrisis, nothing feels certain. But looking at the work that our members are doing across all of the countries we're working in, what strikes me is that the common thread amongst all of them is the only thing more powerful than fear, and that's faith. So faith, true faith that people's minds can be changed, faith that laws can be drafted, that norms can be shifted, and that ultimately child marriage can be eradicated in our lifetime, like polio. We've seen it happen with other issues. We believe it's happening and is possible. And this is where I think philanthropy has a uniquely catalytic role to play. Because as we've talked about, philanthropy can provide that flexible multi-year funding that helps organizations not only grow, but pivot and adapt. Because organizations have to pivot. Every single organization we work for is having to rapidly rethink their strategy, their human resources, every aspect, and they need flexible funding to do that. Gender equality, as we know, it's a long game, right? And they need to have these organizations need to have the runway to be able to adapt and make the changes, just like a business would. So that's faith in the form of flexibility. Second, philanthropy can support advocacy, movement building, and systems change, which are harder to measure in the short term. So that's faith in the form of time. And then finally, philanthropy can take risks on new actors and new approaches, which is what you were talking about. Faith in the form of trust, really trusting the leaders of these movements. So ultimately, moving from that scarcity mindset to like a more radical, truly not faith-driven in a religious sense, but faith-driven in the conviction that drives us as activists and as people working in this field. I think that's what we need. We need a little bit more radical optimism. So thanks for letting me get on that soapbox.
Thank you so much, Emily. So I'm going to dive in with another round of questions, but then I know we're running a little bit close to lunchtime, but if we would permit a little bit of eating into our lunchtime together so that we can hear questions from all of you, I would deeply appreciate that. Nevgul, I'll come to you. You know, you laid out so eloquently the work of Sabancı's foundation and the work that you've done over several decades in terms of gender equality. What were, in terms of some of your learnings, what does it take to really build some of those sustained partnerships between foundations, governments, civil society actors, especially in politically constrained environments?
Thank you. So, first of all, I believe that one of the most important things we need is to break silos. So, advancing the gender equality requires a much broader set of actors to engage, as we all agreed. Those actors could be philanthropy, government, civil society organizations. They all have a role to play. And meaningful progress happens only when we work together. As the OECD report highlighted, there is both progress and the challenge. According to the report, gender-focused philanthropy reached $5 billion, representing 8% of the total philanthropic giving, yet only 1% of the co-financed philanthropic funds are directed towards the gender equality initiatives. So this tells us that there is the challenge about mobilizing more resources. We need to create the conditions for collaboration that will help for the gender financing, first of all. We need the platforms, the partnerships, and the co-financing or financing mechanisms that will enable the actors to co-design and to co-finance solutions around the goals. But is collaboration alone enough? No. We also need to ensure that the gender equality is integrated into the major funding priorities that are shaping the future, from climate action to technology innovation. Today, significant resources are mobilized for climate action. Yes, yet less than 0.1%, very little of the global philanthropic funds reaches the intersection gender and climate. So we need more support for women-led, gender-responsive climate solutions as well, and climate is only an example. As we look to the future, gender equality must also be part of the next generation funding priorities, opportunities. So we are entering the new phase shaped by AI. AI is creating new actors, new resources, potentially new wave of philanthropy as well. The key question is here whether gender equality will be part of the new funding agendas. Unlocking more co-financing for gender equality requires a shift in mindset as well. We need to move from working in silos to partnerships, from fragmenting funding towards the coordinated co-financed funding that will drive the systematic change. This is how philanthropy can strengthen the catalytic role and accelerate the progress towards the gender equality, in our opinion.
Thank you so much for that, Nevgul. Some real important reflections for us all on what it's going to take to really mobilize multiple actors in support of gender equality. Kurt, AVPN's Gender Equality Fund has pooled capital and funds from multiple and very diverse actors, Fondation Chanel, the Gates Foundation, Minderoo, among others. And you've managed to pool these different actors to give flexible multi-year funding for grassroots groups working on gender equality throughout Asia. What were some of the challenges in aligning philanthropic capital with the priorities of those frontline organizations and getting funders to co-finance rather than fund alone?
Yeah, I think it's what we discussed already before. I think the differences in strategies, in approaches, in change theories, in funding cycles, in risk appetite. So I think whenever you bring 4, 5, 6 funders together, you will have those differences. And then I think you need to invest enough time to find alignment, to embrace that abundance. And I think indeed, you have you need the data to back all of this up. I'm very much in favor of data also. I think it's an end-to-end story. And I think so that was, I think, what guaranteed a breakthrough is like taking your time to talk through the differences, understand them, understand where everyone came from, and then try to find a win-win-win situation for all. I think what is obviously also a powerful argument is that the type of organizations we want to fund with this fund, they typically have, as we all know the reality, a lot, non-profits, movements, they have different funders, they all need their different type of reporting, so that's such a huge waste of time, of staff to write all those different reports. And so I think it was a powerful argument that by pooling those resources, we also allowed, the organization that we support to just write one report and spend most of their time to what matters most.
I also reflect on, and I'm sure you've seen this, Kurt, and maybe can animate this better, is sometimes when you bring very, very different funders together in the room, there's actually some very interesting tensions or arguments that happen. And I see those really as positives, because I feel like actually if you're bringing very diverse actors together who might not align or agree, and you don't need to agree on everything, I think we're in a moment where we have to be building the biggest tents possible. And, of course we need to stay really true to values and impacts and outcomes that we're all hoping to achieve, like for better progress in our communities. But, I think that those positive disagreements are sometimes really helpful because they help open up new apertures or new avenues for you all to think very differently about how to behave in collaborations. But I'm sure you have lots of stories to tell from the many collaborations and funds that you've built.
Yeah, I think just something I wanted to add is that because it's interesting, you mentioned that fund, you also mentioned the funders, Chanel, Minderoo, Gates, they're all Western funders, right, for an initiative in Asia. And so something we still need to learn outside Asia is to build a stronger awareness on how fast the local impact ecosystem has been, been more mature, more sophisticated, has grown. There are now a lot of local funders, for example, that you basically should work with. And again, that brings extra complexities because they bring difference in terms of, agendas, etc. But I think already symbolically, any collaboration going forward in Africa, in Asia, should involve also local funders. And I think we don't have yet that mindset. I think I'm still involved, because I'm often active outside Asia, involved in conversations between funders who are all non-Asian to figure out how they will collaborate, and not having yet the reflex to actively reach out to the Asian funders.
Yeah. I have another reflection as you were talking is that, you know, obviously the ODA cuts are devastating to civil society groups around the world, and particularly, you know, the dismantling of US aid in particular. However, I think some of the opportunities that I heard from domestic philanthropy in many of those countries was, well, at least we get a seat at the table, at least we get to define some of the development outcomes in our own countries, because often, you know, if US government was at the table, that many local philanthropic actors didn't feel like they had the same scale or the same power to be able to sit at those tables and help to, you know, actually elevate the voices of local civil society in what was happening. And so I think amongst these kind of ruins of the catastrophe of it all, there are these interesting sort of conversations happening as to what domestic philanthropy and what those opportunities mean, and you know, with private philanthropy, what's that kind of role? And I think coming to you, Nilofer, you know, Gates is one of the largest foundations in the world. You know, it has outsized impact in the gender space from the reports. You know, 52% of all gender funding in private foundations comes from your foundation. And, you know, you could focus on so many areas of gender equality, and you've chosen to really hone in on health and women's health. And you've committed almost 2.5 billion towards that, and looking at underfunded areas in low middle income countries, so STIs, HIV diagnosis, ultrasound therapies you were talking about earlier. In your perspective, why the focus on women's health? And then what role do investments like this play in the wider landscape of gender financing? Why do they matter?
I love that question. So I think women's health is at the core of gender equity, because when a woman dies from childbirth, when a girl cannot go to school because her periods are painful, when a woman has an unintended pregnancy that she did not plan for and she has to shut down her business, that impacts her life. It impacts her whole life. I'll share a story. There is an organization in Pakistan called the Kashif Foundation. They give microloans to 5 million women. And when you ask their founder, what is the biggest reason that the business fails, she says very confidently, and they're a very evidence-driven organization because we really care about evidence, is unintended pregnancy. She did not plan for that pregnancy. So, exactly. So I think that entire holistic view of women's health is what we bring to this investment. And to talk a little bit about the investment, I think it is covering the entire arc of the women's life cycle, right? Even before she's entering the workforce, we care about menstrual disorders like heavy menstrual bleeding. We care about contraception access, and not just access, the choice of contraceptive. Some women are allergic, they don't want an IUD, so they should have an hormonal choice. They should have a non-hormonal choice. She should have a self-injectable. We care about that choice to give her that bodily autonomy and agency. To this date, and this is not just true in low-income countries, but even in high-income countries, there is no cure for preeclampsia, hypertension during pregnancy. There is no drug. It is shocking. Like, we're living in the richest the world has ever been, and preeclampsia, which is the leading cause of maternal deaths, has no cure. 1 in 7 women, I think, in India have gestational diabetes. When they're pregnant, their blood sugar spikes up. Again, not dealt with effectively. There is maternal immunization. We make sure that women have access to the right vaccines. We make sure that they have access to the right nutrition so that their babies are delivered in a healthy way. And all of this entire sort of spectrum, if you see, of women health interventions is how we're approaching this. But I think we also recognize that just creating the product, just building the innovation is not enough. It is not going to reach the people who need it most unless you don't have market access, unless the regulatory pathways don't exist, unless there is no policy infrastructure. And that's why we have to come together. Like, we cannot sit in a lab in New Jersey and create a drug that will solve something for a woman in Africa, right? Which is why I think such a big investment plays 3 roles in my mind. One, it signals that this is a serious issue and we're ready to make a serious commitment. So because when this investment took place last August, after that, we saw so many organizations doing research to quantify the economic impact of women's health. So the 1 trillion figure that I cited, it came out 3 months after that commitment. And I don't want to belabor the point on economic implications, but I believe that a system fails if it is not incentivized to succeed. If there are not enough incentives, it will fail, and economic levers are the most well-evidenced form of success so far. If something has got monetary gains, it succeeds in the market, right? Like, we're in late-stage capitalism, we all agree. So I think that's happened. One, there has just been visibility. People are talking about women's health. They're looking at it as an investable case. Second, I think this philanthropy, like to your point, philanthropy can play the role of flexible capital. It is risk capital. It is growth capital. It can enable access when there are no margins for private sector. So one, we're de-risking it for a lot of investors. We're doing volume guarantees. For example, Pfizer manufactured a contraception, and they said, we cannot provide this for more than, because if we produce more than 20 million, we suffer a loss. So we subsidized it for them. We told Bayer that we will guarantee volumes. This product is needed in Africa. And so we had to guarantee to them. So I think by doing these innovative sort of strategies and by implementing them, we're de-risking it for the whole sector. And then I think most importantly, we're creating a sandbox for real breakthrough innovation. Like, we're telling folks that make the first preeclampsia drug, make the first non-hormonal IUD. And I think that 2.5 billion is a figure that can make you want to do new things, right? So I think that sort of is how the ecosystem has changed after that commitment.
Thank you so much for that. Lots to chew on in terms of the importance and the centrality of women's health in so many of the other changes. Emily, Girls Not Brides, it represents 1,400 or more really small local organizations or national and international level collaborations. So, different set of actors from perhaps like healthcare innovations and health systems actors. But those kind of grassroots women or girl-led, youth-led group, what are the current trends in gender financing that you're seeing? How is it shaping the work of the members that you work with around the world and the wider movement? And what do you think that implies for philanthropy and how it should be directing its resources moving forward?
Sure, thank you. So as I had mentioned previously, some of the trends that we've been seeing are really about that increased competition amongst the actors. And we see the solution to that to be really leaning into the collective action which drives the movement. So one of the things that we're doing at Girls Not Brides is we've launched something called the End Child Marriage Collective. And it's essentially a solution to what we're all talking about. It's an opportunity, an initiative for collaboration across philanthropy, innovative finance, and government, with the sole focus on embedding child marriage outcomes and indicators in other larger funding pools. So our analysis has shown that the funding that's directly going to child marriage is decreasing, and we just did some new research with Publish What You Fund and Girls First funds. And if you think that gender funding is bad, the child marriage funding is even worse. It's essentially been dominated by 8 funders over the last 15 years. Around 5 of those are governments, and 3 of those are foundations. Of the 3 foundations, 1 has shut, and the other 2 are not funding child marriage anymore. They've deprioritized it. Of the 5 government actors, 3 of those have basically cut gender from their ODA budget. So this situation for child marriage funding is grave. And, why don't people collaborate? They're not in enough pain. If you don't do something unless, I think, as a human being, unless you absolutely have to do it, I think that's just human nature. And so I think we just haven't been in enough pain as a sector to force us to collaborate the way we need. But the child marriage sector and the child marriage work isn't going to survive this crisis without that collaboration. It's not optional anymore, it's essential. So the End Child Marriage Collective has a goal to mobilize, both through protecting existing funding and unlocking new funding, $1 billion by 2030. And that may sound like a lot of money, but the reality is what has existed in the last 15 years is 1.5 billion. So what we're actually doing is aiming lower, but we have to keep that existing 1 billion out there to see the change that we want. If we were able to go from 1 in 4 girls being married to 1 in 5 girls with all of that funding, and now the funding is being reduced, we're gonna need to work really hard to keep it together. So the End Child Marriage Collective aims to do exactly what we're talking about, which is show people using arguments that appeal to what they're looking to fund, how integrating simple indicators and outcomes, just measuring whether child marriage changes because of your education program, just adding an indicator about, okay, you have a massive health program that's being, co-financed by government and private sector. What happens if you added these 3 indicators and you actually measured how that's impacting child marriage? That can create really systemic change. So we have to be so intentional and strategic about what we're advocating for. And so what we're advocating for is using this existing funding that isn't gonna get cut because folks still care about it, but putting in and integrating the specific gender issues we care about. I don't know if that answered the question, but that's what I have to say about it.
No, I think it was lots of interesting and important food for thought. And one of the things that you said really struck me, this sort of, and it goes back to a point you made right at the start, Kurt, if we're not angry enough, perhaps we won't take the action required in this moment. And so perhaps a call in to all of us is to be more angrier, to have faith, to go the long distance together and bring in new partners, to have that radical optimism that you talked about, but also I think having the evidence and the different entry points for different actors to come together on this. Ashraf, did you have a question?
For Emily, very short, because she mentioned fear and faith, yeah?
Yeah.
And we've linked the whole discussion now about funding and financing. Can you just very briefly say, are you optimistic if you look to the new generation, so the generational involvement? Are young people these days? Because I'll give you the answer. I look at it. I look at a lot of young people around the globe getting active and pursuing also faith. How do you see that from your perspective?
So actually, I was having this conversation with a colleague who runs the gender studies department at Sabancı University, and I was asking her, I got a gender studies degree like 25 years ago or however long it was. Are people still interested in pursuing gender studies? It's not very popular with parents, for those of us who have gender studies degrees. No one is like, yes, you're studying gender studies. Like, that's gonna be a real moneymaker. So, and I was enthusiastic to hear that, yes, the interest is growing, and as the world is getting worse, folks are actually showing more interest. And I'm on the board of an organization called Gender Jobs, which stems from an initiative I helped create many years ago called Feminist Job Board, which was helping folks enter this market as professionals, helping them find ways to actually get jobs working in gender equality. And the interest has grown so much in the last years. So in short, I am optimistic.
I just to add, I think that there's some really interesting data as well that's coming out around the sort of, I guess, the social action and activity coming from young people around the world. And I think on some extreme ends, you see how young people have toppled their governments in Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Nepal as well, many Asian countries. But also I think that, and you're seeing a lot more sort of action coming, on the streets. But I think, Nilofer, you spoke about AI, and I think the tech and AI space is also really interesting in how young people are using some of those mechanisms to sort of collaborate for action. There's some really interesting research on how young people have been using gaming platforms like Roblox or others in order to organize and mobilize others in their community, raise money for, important causes in their local community, and sort of get active as active citizens. That's really interesting. Ashra, you started us off on the role, and I wanted to invite a few questions from those of you in the audience or people that are joining on Zoom as well. So please raise your hands. We'll take 2 or 3 questions. And if you could stand up, wait for the microphone. If you could just introduce your name and the organization before your question. There's one here, and then one here, and one here. So we have 3 and 4. We'll try and take 4 in the first round and see how we go. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm Gülru Göker from Sabancı University. Also, as Emily, if I may have remarked, the director of SUGender, Gender and Women Studies Center of Excellence. So I have a question from the point of view of gender studies and gender research. Thank you for all the very insightful talks. Many of you have talked about the importance of data, evidence, research, the measurement of impact. So the processes that have led to the decline of ODA also have led to decline of funding for gender studies and gender research. We know that gender studies is under pressure, despite the fact that many people are interested in studying it. And at the same time, with political pressures, with social pressures, and along with it, AI creating potentials, but at the same time undermining, I would say, gender expertise, because if I may, it is also producing experts without expertise. So knowledge infrastructures are under strain. So what do you think about, in terms of talking about collaborations between philanthropy and research, universities, and universities are also changing, so let's say research atmospheres and knowledge infrastructures in particular. So I would like to hear your insights about philanthropy support for gender research and gender studies and potential collaborations. I know Sabancı Foundation's view on this. They have been supporting gender research and gender training for many years now, and SUGender's flagship programs such as training for gender equality. So if any of the panelists would like to share some remarks, I would be grateful. Thank you.
Thank you. We will take all of the questions and then we'll come to the panel so they can remark on them all. I think there was one person here.
Hello, I am Hilal. I represent 2 organizations here. One of them is Silva Women's Fund of Turkey, and the other one is WWHR, Women for Women's Human Rights organization. Actually, I am very thankful. This platform is needed, timely very needed. The ODA cuts, it's huge. They are alarming. The numbers are very alarming. But we need actually the solution. We all see the solution in the collaboration. But I think we need to look at the collaborations in a deeper way. The collaborations, we are talking about the collaborations, but who collaborate with whom, and in which, how to say it, in which dimensions. In our report, Women's Fund for Turkey, we had it published recently in the report, and in this report, we found out that the big donors, the governments and the international gender donors, they are using more and more intermediary institutions and the grassroots organizations, women's organizations, feminist organizations, LGBTQ organizations. They are receiving the funding from these intermediary organizations. And it has an impact. And it's not good for capacity building for these civil society organizations who struggle for gender equality. It has also economical impacts also for these organizations. It has also a political message. There is a message behind of these actually trend, I can say. It would be my question for all panelists. How can we overcome indirect relationships in gender financing ecosystem, I would say. That's my question.
Thank you so much. The lady in the yellow jacket.
I'm the Deputy Country Director of UN Women Turkey office, and it is very unfortunate to take the floor as an intermediary organization that is supporting grassroots organizations and women's human rights organizations. Yet I'm proud of doing. Of course, yeah. And I just want to, I have one question and one evidence from how the women-led organizations and women's human rights organizations are suffering from these ODA and humanitarian aid cuts. This is a report that was launched last year by UN Women. It is done in more than 40 crisis settings, with more than 400 civil society organizations, women-led organizations, and 17 of them which are from Turkey, and 90 of them told about financial strains. Over half have already, in 2025, suspended programs, and nearly half expect to shut down within the six next months, meaning, if this report was last year, meaning that they are not around anymore. So I just wanted to share this evidence, how important it is, this gender financing, especially for women-led organizations. And this will take me to my question. This is even more important now in this, you all talked about the poly crisis. One of them is the gender backlash, and you talked about, Emily, about the fall in financing for elimination of child early and forced marriage. Do you think this is also in line with this gender backlash and increasing financing for the anti-gender movements? Because we also see this as a trend. I just want to hear about that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And the last question from the gentleman at the back over there. I think you had your hand up. And don't worry, I've been taking notes, so I will summarize all the questions again for panelists.
Thank you very much. The middle organization, I am Berkan Toros from United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees in Turkey. All the gender dilemma and all of the humanitarian support work from my point of view is like kind of a Dante's Inferno. It can go down and down and down. There is no end into it. Within this whole perspective, what I think is that maybe a part of the discussion also lies within the refugee community as well, not only in Turkey, but around the globe. Because of the fact that you are losing your country, you are moving to a different location, and at that point you are also losing a lot of rights, access problems, and those types of issues. Private philanthropy has been supporting for some time, but the trend and on that area is also kind of going down globally too. So I was just wondering, especially from Nilüfer Hanım, from Bill Gates Foundation, which is also supporting UNHCR globally, what do you think that international organizations do to increase private philanthropy, not only from big philanthropic structures like yourself, but also at an individual level? Thank you.
Thank you so much for all of the questions. Is it a short one? Sorry. A very short one. Sure. And then no more questions, because I think everyone wants to eat, and then we can have lots of conversations over lunch.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm Cornelio Ftodi, Senior General Advisor with UNDP. I just wanted to reflect on the cuts and the financing that we're talking, because we also know that the global wealth is not going down, right? Yeah. So I think very often we talk about the ODA cuts and the financing of gender equality within that perspective, but using Kurt's offer to have an abundance mindset is, okay, so there is wealth out there, so how do we make use of that one, right? And then there is also this slide that OECD presented on the philanthropic organizations partnering with other philanthropic organizations, 38%, and with private companies, which are kind of, in a way, affiliated with philanthropic organizations, right? Another 26%. So almost 2/3 of the total partnerships is within that area. Yet, even in the philanthropic organization, the funding for gender equality is only accounts to only 8%. So my question, it would be an open one, and to say, how can philanthropic organizations make use of your influence and the power within the networks that you have with other philanthropic organizations to increase that 8% to make a bigger impact on gender equality? So, you know, let's use where our assets are instead of looking where the cuts are, because I think that's important. And with that one, just to make also an offer from UNDP, we do have a global program on certificating companies and institutions for gender equality, because I know we live in an era of competition and everyone wants to look great. So this certification program, which is called the Gender Equality Seal program, which we offer for both private sector companies, but also for the institutions like foundations, could be something to consider being used by the philanthropic organizations also in relations to other private sectors. Because that one could be a competitive way of saying, you know, we're doing better. So happy to discuss that one over the lunch.
Yep, people are going to come find you over the lunch. Thank you. Okay, so we've got 5 brilliant questions. We've got a question around gender research, funding for gender studies, sort of how we're seeing that perhaps correlate to broader trends in gender financing. There's the question around the role of intermediaries, but also who gets to collaborate and how does that perhaps reinforce or change some of the power dynamics within the financing ecosystems or funding ecosystems. Is some of the retreats in funding, either in ODA or private foundations, a symptom of the broader gender backlash? What do you think international organizations can do to increase philanthropy, not just among big actors, but individuals? And then the last thing is, how can philanthropy influence that broader kind of trend? And, you know, are there incentives such as certification systems that may help bring in new actors? Whoever wants to go with any of those questions first.
I can speak to the backlash question because I think absolutely it is. I think that despite all of the efforts and progress we've made, misogynistic cultural norms are so prevalent just under the surface in every society. And I think that given the right combination of factors, they resurface every few years in a new ugly form, and that's what we're seeing. So I think one of the things that worries me is during the rise of Me Too and all of the sort of popularity and the moment that gender equality had a few years ago, I think it was over-elevated by the sort of late-stage capitalists cashing in on this like trend of gender equality. And I think what we're seeing is that it was so easily thrown out the minute it was under threat, right? Like the minute that Trump made that executive order against gender, even the most committed organizations started backpedaling. So I think what we have to do is be more honest about the level of misogyny and backlash to gender equality that we're always dealing with, and not get caught unprepared, because it's always there. We always have to keep fighting it. This isn't something new. So that's my thoughts on that.
Thank you. Nilofer, any of the questions that you might want to respond to or reflect on?
I think I'm happy to talk a little bit about, I think that two of the audience members touched on how big foundations are unable to sort of really get to the organizations at the grassroots level. So I think there was this why or a causality question, and then there was like a what can organizations do to be able to, you know, get more funding. So I will say this, and this is controversial, absorptive capacity is not a non-profit problem, it is a donor problem, right? It is what a donor, how they build a donor's capacity to give to the small organization. So having said that, I will still say that One of the reasons, there are many ways in which foundations operate. Foundations, especially private foundations, a lot of them have living donors who have their theory of action, how they want to give, to what they give, which is why they have strategies and they follow that strategy. And sometimes there are really amazing organizations that just are not on strategy for that organization. And that's why I think sometimes it's just really important to understand what the strategy is. I joined the foundation just over a year ago, and I used to look at the foundation from, as an outsider, and I used to be like, but how can you not invest in this? And I think now that I'm inside the foundation, I understand that money that is given to A, it's true that you're not giving to B to Z, but sometimes it's so important to invest in A that because nobody else will invest in A, and I think that's sort of how a lot of big foundations, such as whether it's the Children Investment Fund Foundation, whether it's the MasterCard Foundation, these are the biggest philanthropies in the world. They have their strategies, and they have a very either it's an evidence-based sort of theory of action saying that we believe that financial inclusion is the best lever for economic empowerment. Is that true or not? We don't know. But you have to make investments to test that hypothesis. So I think one thing for organizations is to really take the time to understand a philanthropist strategy. And second, don't change yourself for that strategy, right? I think that is a big mistake that some nonprofits think. They'd be like, okay, if I tell them that I'm working on this, then maybe I will get the funding. And I know it's easy to say that as a funder, but I genuinely think it catches up if you are not being authentic to your theory of action, to what you're good at, to what you have done for many years. So I think that is one paradigm that I want to land with the audience. I understand the role of intermediaries in the ecosystem, and I can also understand why that is frustrating for nonprofits. But I believe that intermediaries can actually play a really important role if they are responsible, ethical, and are really sort of, and they are on the nonprofit side, they truly believe in building the capacity. Because there is a lot of load that an intermediary can absorb, right? Imagine a nonprofit with a very small annual budget having to meet the evaluation needs of a really big funder. That burden can take away so much of your capacity. You'll have to hire another person to be able to just meet that need. And an intermediary can do that for you. But I think intermediaries have so much responsibilities, especially if they are re-granters. So the way that they are doing diligence, it has to be thoughtful. I think one of the biggest advantages of having proximate intermediaries is that you understand Turkey like someone sitting in Seattle like me will never understand, right? Whether it's because of the language, whether it's the cultural nuances, whether it's just the way things work over here. And I think that intermediaries should be bridge makers. They should be building bridges, not being gatekeepers. So I think embracing that mentality is helpful. I think I addressed two of those questions.
Yeah, thank you. Kurt, any reflections from you on the questions?
Maybe a reflection, no answers. Maybe a reflection. On the backlash, I think the backlash is against so many things, right? It's not only against gender, it's against climate change, democracy, in some contexts even against philanthropy. So I would say the short-term trend is not our friend. But in my own professional experience, I've been often proven wrong in my pessimism. So I hope I will be proven wrong again in my pessimism this time. And that's where I derive my optimism from, because my pessimism has been proven wrong so many times. And I think so we need to continue to keep faith, to collect data, to find the business models, to remain a bit angry. And then I think we will win this battle, and the trend will become our friend again. On gender, what we see happening that works best now within AVPN is that integrating in programs, which are around another theme. So not have a dedicated separate gender program, but have a health and gender program or a climate and gender program. And within those broader thematics, you can build a stronger case, again, using data, economic models, and other arguments to say why, if you're concerned about climate change, if you're concerned about AI and employability, for example, if you're concerned about health, it's like, investing in gender is your best pick, basically. So build it in a stronger narrative and thematic rather than focus only on the gender approach. And on the research, yeah, absolutely key. I have no solution on where to find the funding. I think it's always been difficult. It's even more difficult now. But as AVPN, we're a platform that strongly believes in bringing all providers of capital together. So we bring together and philanthropists and impact investors and academics and enterprises. So at least in our space, they really have a space.
Can I just add to the research point? Because I genuinely feel there is no substitute for foundational research. AI will increase efficiencies. It will help you do it faster. It will not help you do it more accurately. Because at the end of the day, these multi-language models, they are as good as the data that goes inside them, and rubbish in, rubbish out, right? So at the end of the day, I think there is a certain level of research that is not going to be substituted. And if you hear any of these very tech CEOs, like the CEO of NVIDIA, the CEO like Sam Altman, if you hear them talk about AI and you ask them what jobs are going to be substituted, they say coding jobs. And they say what jobs are going to be really important, they say humanities jobs. So I think that skill set of critical thinking, bringing the sort of theoretical aspects into how you interpret data, that is not going to be substituted. I actually feel pretty optimistic about that.
Thank you. Nevkul, any
Yeah, I want to say a few words about the intermediary question. I very recently attended a panel and I was moderator, which was about grants in Turkey. We had two intermediary organizations, one Hrant Dink Foundation and İKSV Foundation, and also someone representing European Union as they started to use the intermediary. What I thought at the end of the panel is that it is a new approach, let's say. In the second round, the first round is done. They are now about to enter the second round. They were very open to feedback. Actually, the lady who represented European Union, we can connect you if you don't have the connection, was very open to listen to the audience with lots of questions, of course. There are benefits in it, but also there are difficulties. So this is something new in the market for the Turkey as well. About gender studies, as I mentioned, for every major program, it's our way of approaching with a gender study. Yesterday, we were having our guest, Ken San from Sasakawa Foundation, talking about a new collaboration, and he was also thinking about a gender study as well to start the program. So this is very essential in my opinion. And for the last thing I have heard about the certification gender equality, I think private sector companies love it. Per my experiences, I see certification is a great motivator, as there are so many private companies investing into gender equality. Also in our network, I see it a good point from your point. Thank you.
Thank you. I think one of the questions that some of you asked that may not have picked up on was just around the what private philanthropy can do to increase philanthropy more sort of broadly. And I think just from the work that I know that all four of these amazing speakers and their organizations do, I think all of them, a lot of the work, whether it's the Gates Foundation, Sabancı, the Girls Not Brides, like bringing people together, I think it's that when you're using your convening power as a platform or as a funder, when you're able to bring new players to the table. I think that there are opportunities to help sensitize new funding to come to the table. I think the question that you had particularly on how do you not just target big philanthropy, but also sort of individuals. I think a lot of foundations, private foundations, have also done a lot to try and lobby their own personal governments around increasing some tax incentives or methodologies. Like in the UK, we have something called gift aid, where the government subsidizes or supplements an individual donation from whether I give £5 or £10. So I think things like that are ways that both foundations are trying to use their social or their cultural capital to bring in new actors, and also to change some of the material conditions that may incentivize individuals and different community members to also give in and give some funding. I'm so grateful to these amazing 4 panelists for their time and giving up their expertise. I'm so grateful to all of you for your extra time that you have given up for your lunch to listen to us speak for a bit longer. And also thank you to the OECD team for bringing us together, and the Sabancı Foundation and team.
OECD and Sabancı Foundation, I just want to thank you all again for joining us here today. I think it was an absolutely wonderful conversation, and sorry, you can hear my echo there again. And there's a lunch outside, so we can continue our conversations on collaboration. And from the OECD side, just to some very quick points. So on the multiple entry points and kind of mapping more philanthropy, that's something that we are intending to do with the Centre on Philanthropy for our next edition, the 4th one. And we're actively thinking about collaboration, the behavioural change needed. So if anyone wants to talk to me about that during the lunch, you're very welcome. But once again, thank you so much. It was a pleasure to be with you all here today, and please join us for lunch. And I think if the speakers can stay for a photo, that would be great. Thank you once again. Thank you.